Hello, my name is Brett Cease. Thanks so much for joining me today for my Pachakacha presentation about my recent expedition to Antarctica. In the next 6.5 minutes, I hope to share with you, the listener, the highlights of what I learned about this mysterious continent at the bottom of the world, from its biology to my personal highlights, as well as the impacts this last true wilderness is facing from our changing climate. Here's who I got to adventure with the whole 2.5 weeks, my dad and my sister. As I know you might know, this trip was all made possible by my dad, who had a near-death experience several summers ago from a routine surgery gone wrong. And after his heroic recovery, we got to share in one of the experiences he's had on his bucket list his whole life, going down south. So amidst all the challenges of the journey, it was really obviously amazing to be there and spend so much time celebrating the gift of life. So first, a little bit of background, and all of these slides, by the way, are footnoted with links in the speaker notes for those that are interested in doing their own further research after today. As a continent, Antarctica is extremely unique politically for all the reasons that are listed here on this image since the Antarctic Treaty was signed in 1959. And our citizen science and tourist experience was made possible through an alignment of that treaty with the IAATO body cooperating within that system. So here is our ship. Just kidding. That's a beach old tugboat in the Ushuaia harbor for fun. So no worries, we weren't on that one. Here's the real one, a 279-foot ice strengthened expedition ship built for NOAA as a research vessel in 1970. It tops out at around 16 miles an hour. It's 52 feet wide with enough space for 46 cabins and up to 90 passengers and 38 crew. And this photo is taken when we were already in Antarctica, but we left from the very tip of South America. That city, the Ushuaia, is what the boat's named after. So a little bit of a window in. This is kind of a fun video. Try not to get seasick if you haven't taken your meclizine today. After boarding, how does one get to Antarctica? Well, it's called the Drake Passage. I'm actually going to mute this so that you don't hear it. Maybe I can't do that anyways. And it's the only way to get there from South America. There's no landmass that prevents the strong westerlies to slow down. So imagine house-sized waves crashing over the boat every 5 to 10 seconds for 2 days straight, both directions. And that was my personal joy. The movie is obviously one that I took in our commons room of the ship heading down, and this wind map on the side is really some of the actual currents that we faced from the wind on the way back. All right, so when you get there, you are struck immediately by how quickly the mountains rise up from the ocean, fitting with discovering, at least for me, that Antarctica is not only the coldest continent in the world, but also the highest, the driest, and the windiest. Its average elevation is 8,200 feet. Its katabatic winds have been recorded at speeds of around 200 miles an hour, and the lowest temperature ever recorded on Earth was there at 128 degrees below zero, putting Duluth to shame. But for those of us on the boat, we only really had to deal with 32 to 35 degrees because obviously we were on the water the whole time and it wasn't frozen. So we didn't tough it out there. Don't feel bad for me too much. Speaking of, let's talk a little bit about boat life. One of the best things about the Ushuaia, beyond having access to the instructors that gave lectures every day on the topics they were researching back in their university, was the ship had an open bridge policy. So here you can see both a shot from the bridge of the ship navigating an icy passage, making sure to avoid any icebergs dead ahead, as well as the interior view of the bridge itself and what that looks like with the captain and the first mates busy at the controls. The real workhorses of our expedition were something called the Zodiacs. You can see here a bunch of shots of them in action. They're basically used to transport us ocean level, cruising around icebergs or visiting the remote and isolated sites that were accessible only by these large, heavy-duty inflatable vessels. Yes, they are safe. They're especially designed for expedition work, and they have a large reserve of buoyancy. So a really cool experience to just shuttle around in those. And here's a window into our 10 stops that we made along the way, all along the Antarctic Peninsula that you can kind of see if you're looking at the actual continents, the duckbill of the Antarctica and the South Shetland Islands. You officially cross the Antarctic convergence when you get down into the South Shetland Islands here. And over the course of the week, we obviously made many stops getting to explore the quiet continent and the wildlife. So let's talk animals, what you're probably all curious about, starting at the bottom of the food chain. At the bottom, our resident biologist researcher shared with us that in the Southern Ocean, one species, the Antarctic krill, makes up an estimated biomass of around 379 million tons every year, making it among the largest total biomass species in the world. Krill have adapted to the Southern Ocean's cold waters and depend on sea ice to complete their life cycle. So that's obviously where climate change comes in. Unfortunately, the fast warming waters have already shifted their range and their center of distribution south by about 275 miles. And scientists predict that their habitat's going to continue to shrink due to ocean acidification, which heavily disrupts their egg development, leading some to even worry that it could collapse overall in the next century. What other animals do we see that depend on this massive surge of krill? Let's start with the biggest ones. The most abundant baleen whale in the nearshore waters around Antarctica are the humpback whale. They travel thousands of miles from really around the equator, Colombia, Mexico, down to Antarctica to feast on this abundant southern krill in the summer. And to get there during migration, they may not actually eat as much as 8 months out of the year. So it's a lot of devotion to get down to those krill, and they're known to actually have the longest migration of any mammal. In addition to whales, we saw plenty of these cuties. Waddell seals, you can see they're absolutely adorable. They're very friendly and easygoing. They didn't shy away from us for any of our visits. They're philopatric, which means that they return to the same place every year to give birth to their own pups. There's over 800,000 of them in the Antarctic region, and they actually are the furthest south mammal by keeping breathing holes open in the ice with their raspy teeth. You can even see one of them is sunbathing nuzzled next to a giant petrel. What a friendly bunch. All right, so along with all of these, we had plenty of shorebirds. Here's a couple that I featured, including the skua, the albatross, and the cormorant, and the shearbill. Not those, sorry. I learned that all seabirds, this is news to me, apparently have salt glands, which allow them to eat a lot of salty food. I wish I had one of those. And also in Antarctica, there's only 35 total species of birds, period. But out of those 35 species, there's 350 million birds in Antarctica. So a high abundance with low diversity, and 65% of those are penguins. So we saw 3 different types of penguins. They are listed in order of left to right: the gentoo, the chin strap, and the diminutive adelie. And here's where climate change rears its ugly head again. Rising temperatures in Antarctica are basically hammering the region's Adelie penguins and the sea ice on which they depend. With ice forming later and melting earlier, many of their colonies are actually disappearing. It was almost impossible to see them. We only saw them on one of our 10 stops, and this was like the one Adelie penguin I found, but that is unfortunate and important to highlight. Penguins are also philopatric, which means they return to the exact same nesting spot every year. You can see them in action here. Both males and females protect the egg, and it's so cute. The males spend hours every day literally just gathering little pebbles stone by stone to create these nests for the same spot that they return to for the actual delivery and nurturing, incubating of the eggs. The other thing you might not know about penguins is that beyond being adorable, they absolutely live in squalor to one's nose. As detailed by NPR, the best way to recreate this, if you want to do this at home, everyone, is to basically take some old cigarette butts, soak them in ammonia, mix in some rotten shrimp, and then let it sit out in the sun for a few days, then take a whiff. And you'll have the same replicated experience that I had of the smell of penguin guano. And it's largely just because of their sheer scale. As you can see here from a photo I took, this is one of the colonies that we saw. And there's literally hundreds of thousands of nesting pairs in each of them. And there's no sanitation management. So just be warned. In closing, in addition to animals, we got to visit one of the research stations. This is Base Brown, and that scenic overlook of Paradise Harbor. There's the base down here. It was established in the 50s, and it created one of the most complete biology laboratories on the peninsula from the Argentinians. And they've published over 100 scientific papers just from this one research station alone on biology, ecology, oceanography, and sea ice glaciology. As we started to return back northwards, we made one final stop at Michelson Harbor, an old whaling station that had long been abandoned and left to age, with whale bones surrounding it on the beach. It was a reflective place to start contemplating the passage of time and how recent humans had started to first impact this continent, and yet what an impact we are already having collectively. And alongside this recent human history, we witnessed hundreds upon hundreds of icebergs floating in the cold, open channels of the ocean, composed of snow that had been compacted since before the dawn of humankind. And now, through our faraway greenhouse gas pollution, according to NASA, Antarctica is losing ice mass, melting at an average rate of about 150 billion tons a year. Time can be both short and long, and as we returned back to the port of Ushuaia on the final afternoon, we were treated to a spontaneously beautiful procession of hourglass dolphins that emerged out of nowhere in the Beagle Channel, that same crossing that Darwin took, rounding South America in the HMS Beagle now almost 200 years ago. It was a stunning way to conclude our adventure and reflect on how to share such a powerful experience back home.